You know how it goes in my house. They try and train me and teach me. And I normally say to them, you don't ask me how your dinner got made. I don't have to explain it to you. Just sit down and eat it. I don't want to know how you make it work. Just make it work.
That's it. Doesn't look like it changed. It did. Okay. It's just not telling me that it did. So now you're not Jim any longer. Now you're officially Tammy.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I was having an identity crisis.
It happens sometimes on these broadcasts.
Welcome to Talking About Horses, the podcast that brings the timeless art of horsemanship into the modern world. Join your host, Patrick King, as he dives deep into the heart of horse training, riding, and the stories that connect us to these incredible animals. With decades of experience training horses and riders across the globe, Patrick combines his expertise with the wisdom of extraordinary guests. From dressage trainers to trail riders, Olympic competitors to backyard warriors, seasoned cowboys to psychologists, and so many more. Together, they explore the classical principles of horsemanship, equine fitness, rider psychology, and the journey of learning itself. Get ready to hear candid conversations, thought-provoking insights, and a touch of humor. All with one goal in mind, honoring the welfare of the horse and the timeless pursuit of mastery. So saddle up and join us for Talking About Horses, because every great partnership begins with better understanding.
Thank you, gang, so much for tolerating my technological challenges as we get started here with these broadcasts. We really appreciate you tuning in for what is now episode number 63 of Talking About Horses. This evening, I am joined by Tami Elkayam. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
Yes, good. Okay. Tami is a lifelong student of the equine body, dedicated to understanding its intricacies through both art and science. Her journey began with childhood artwork and culminated in a Bachelor of Fine Arts in painting. She has illustrated anatomical, educational material for several equine professionals, using sketching and illustrating to convey complex concepts. That's why your graphics are always so awesome. His passion for visualizing anatomy led her to integrate the principles of neurology, embryology, and motion into her practice. By applying these concepts through a multifocal lens, Tami has developed tools that are effective for both elite endurance horses and everyday riding companions. In her role as an equine therapist and educator, Tami offers efficient, teachable tools, visuals, and techniques for interacting with the equine body, ensuring they're memorable and comprehensible for students. Her artistic perspective, viewing the horse through the lens of geometric shapes, combined with a deep understanding of equine anatomy, has anchored her in the field of body tensegrity. She believes that the body communicates through art and recognizes movement and related structures is essential for addressing physical issues. Her classes are designed to impart this knowledge, and she's committed to supporting her students and other ethical equine professionals in their journeys. Okay, that's a lot. Tami, tell me about you. Reading that off a script, reading that off a website. So Tami and I are here to really duke it out. We've both got our boxing gloves under the table. We're ready to go at it. We have a bit of a disagreement, I think. We think. We're looking differently. We have different perspectives on the idea of backing a horse up. Before we get started with that, Tami, after I read your bio, tell us just a little quick, if we got stuck in an elevator with you, so it's not the 30-second elevator speech, but if we're stuck for a minute or two, who's Tami? What are you doing? Where did it come from? What spurs your passion?
I am eternally curious, and my ducks are never in a row, and my squirrels are all over the place, which is why I find things fascinating. And I learn and this is how this journey really started, is I did all these modalities that I tried, and I realized that that wasn't what I was seeing. And I started to see when I started to draw. And so I did a lot of, I went through gym, I went through the Upledger Institute, I went a very short stint at the Vlugen, I did Tucker Biokinetics, I did some myofascial, I did a whole bunch of stuff that gave me parts that were interesting but didn't answer the question I've had all along, which is this mammalian natural asymmetry that I saw everywhere. everywhere. And I'm the freak that at airports, when I watch somebody walk different, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I follow them until they creep out. So I think it was only when I did a really short art illustrated thing, because that's how I think. I put my thoughts in the drawing to try and understand body connections. And I mean, I've had stints where I've read nothing but dentist books where my husband is like, are we changing profession? I've had stints where I've read nothing but embryology books. So I kind of do that. I met in 2018 a vet who changed my life. Thank you, Abby. Bought the class and said, you know, there is a heretic physical therapist that looks at people the way you look at horses. And I went, oh, I'm not alone. And so I found Ron Haraska at the Postural Restoration Institute. And it was for me like coming home, because everything he said it way nicer and way better than me, but it was all like, yep.
Okay.
And so once I found him, and I took all the information that I had and what I was seeing, because I'd been cataloging for years, like the patterns that I'd been seeing, the things that I'd been seeing. Once I took all that and I took what I knew and I took how he helped me put it together in a way more organized way, because he clearly has his ducks in a row and his kittens all herded in, I was able to go, oh, I missed a big part of it. And I think this is where kind of all the bits that I'd collected had gone. And, you know, really the Facebook thing was a journey of like documenting what I was discovering, what I was struggling, how I figured it out, what I was learning. And I just put it out there because I think everyday people need help with figuring out what their horse is doing, because we all love horses, right? I don't assume anybody's doing anything to their horse on purpose to be mean. We all love our horses. We all want to help our horses. You know, we all have our limitations, be it financial, where we're located, the discipline we're in, whatever, but we can still make it better for them, right? So that's kind of what I do. I'm not looking to be a specialist. I have created a body of work based on what we all do, which is, you know, we observe the world around us, we have experience that guides us, and we have knowledge, and that helps us form an informed opinion. And so whenever I say things that are really controversial, it's because they don't match what I see, they don't match what I know, and they don't match what I understand. Could I be wrong? Absolutely. Right? Like, I don't claim to know everything. I read something the other day that I literally nearly fell off the treadmill, because I was listening to Jaap van der Waal, who's like the godfather of embryology, and he made a statement that made me go, whoa, I have to go and examine that now, because maybe that puts some of what I do in question. We have to be open to going, ooh, maybe I did have the wrong end of the stick.
See, and I love the way that you said that. Whoa, I've got to go examine that. Right?
Yes.
Like when you posted your post about the backup, stop shoving your horses backwards, right? Or stop shoving them on the back end. I forget exactly how you worded that. But that was my first thought was, yeah, it was a little bit of a, okay, I'm strong in my opinions on this. So it was a little bit of this reads like a crock of shit. I'm not going to lie to you.
Which is fair enough. But the thing is, what I wrote, what people understood from it, and how they responded are like, whoa.
Yes, and that's why I said that reads to me like this. And I know I've read posts that you've written before, and we've had discussions in the past where I've been like, I don't think that's what I don't think the way it's being received is the way it was intended. And so that's when I reached out to you right away and said, hey, I'd like to talk to you about that. Right?
Because we've had lots of discussions before about different things. And,
absolutely.
You know, I have to put out front right away, I am aware that this is a well-established thing. I am aware that while the establishment of the equine, like, let's look at FEI. If you're going to ride an upper-level dressage test, you are required to do it. And so the point of the post was like 90% of horses aren't set up physically or emotionally to do it, and 90% of people are floundering when they're asking the horse to do it, and that's where things go wrong. So when I said don't do it, I'm like, if you don't know what you're doing, and if your horse is not set up to do it, you shouldn't do it. If a horse can't go forward in 3 good gaits in a balanced, controlled fashion, how is putting it in reverse going to help it? And I've asked lots of people this, because I've had people tell me that backing up is going to build strength, that backing up is going to fix stifles and hocks, that backing up is going to give balance, that, I mean, I've seen people use it as a punishment, right? And
Yes.
so I'm trying to raise awareness of what
Mhm.
it's doing to the body. That is my realm. I work with the
Totally.
tensegrity of the body and how it moves.
Mhm.
Do we need to do it? Because if there is an emergency get out, we need to use it? Absolutely. Does the horse need to learn it? Absolutely. But let's set everybody up for success. And the
Mhm.
reality is out there.
And so, and I want to add to that, talking about building strength and things like that. I know I've got several of my students that either are listening to this live or are going to be listening to the replay, and they'll probably send you a message saying, we've heard him. He says that the proper rein back cures everything but pink eye. And I feel confident in making a statement. Obviously it's a broad stroke statement, but if we were to rein back to the pharmacy, we could get the cure for pink eye.
Okay. So,
But I want to
how do I
dive
go about
first.
it?
Yeah. So first I want to break down, if you're okay with this. And I want everybody to know, like, you and I agreed to do this, and what I think has been great is that we've talked about how the professional collaboration for this kind of stuff is really important. But
Yes.
what we didn't talk about is the rein back, is backing up. Like, I feel like that was like an understood, we're not going to touch that until we're live. And I
You
really
know why,
love
though?
that.
Because I do it like with people like Monique and other people that I collab a lot with.
Mhm.
I do it with Dr. Shelley Appleton sometimes, because we discuss what we're going to say. It's like the conversation's already happened. And then when you come to the thing, you're like, So that's why I was like, let's keep
Yeah,
it for this.
absolutely. And I love that, because it's, neither one of us kind of know exactly what the other's going to say. Like, I think it's obvious already by now that this is not a scripted conversation, right? We're going to go with it how we're going to go with it. And this is really what needs to happen more. This is two professionals that share that have strong opinions that are differing, and we've come together to talk about it. And I think
I
it needs to
actually don't
happen
think we're
more.
that far apart.
I agree with you. I definitely, I think that I agree with you. So what I want to do to start with is, can you, and so I'm going to pop this up here. Tasita has already popped in with a comment that rein back and backing up are two different things. And I think
Yes.
that's where our conversation is going to go, is what's the difference? How are they effectively utilized, or how do we throw it the hell away? Right.
And I will agree that I dumped everything into one basket, because in my mind, as I said, I see it for so many reasons,
Mhm.
even the rein back.
Mhm.
And I kind of look at it and I go, because I understand the physical price, or the cumulative physical price, the emotional physical price, and
Mhm.
all that kind of happens. And I see it. When we watch. So people that do dressage, their favorite thing is to watch the Olympics with me, because, like, apparently it's entertainment. And so, I understand why it needs to
I do
happen. I
dressage, and I try
understand.
not to watch the Olympics
Okay,
because I don't find it very entertaining.
I understand that, there are nuances of differences for every discipline.
Mhm.
But this is, I think, where the confusion starts. We have this list of things that can be achieved by putting the horse in reverse. And my concern is always, what is it you actually think you're doing? And
Mhm.
how do you think it's happening in the body?
Mhm.
Right? And if you can answer those things to me in a logical way that makes sense anatomically, then maybe I am wrong. But I'm trying to figure out, like, what is it that people think that they're doing? And like I said, I've had answers that are, there's a range of answers, and yet they're all doing the same move, right? And I'm like, how is this happening?
Mhm. And so I want to dissect that a little bit. Uh, I've been teaching clinics to the public now, all over the world, really, for about 25 years. One of my big things is rein back. Like, I talk about it constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to get into a little bit later the why, okay? But I would also say that in those 25 years, I don't think I've had 25 students come to a clinic and show me a true rein back without coaching. Okay. And this is where I think we're gonna dive deep and find that we're probably closer to the same page than what the post originally seemed to be. But okay, go ahead.
Can we just say, and like, I don't know a lot about the technicalities of dressage. I have people for that. And one of my students in Denmark, she's like the walking encyclopedia. She'll also tell you why all changed after the Napoleonic War. Shout out to Camilla. Like, I just go, I basically went, okay, can you tell me why they really do this and what really happens? Because I don't want to be coming and telling you you're wrong when maybe I am. So I went and did a little research and I looked around a little bit, and essentially the rein back in its origin, I don't know how it is today, in its origin was the litmus test for submission to ridden aid cues, right? And that's because coordination-wise and physically, it is so difficult for the horse to do. It also puts the horse in an emotional state of distress because it locks down respiration. Okay, so this is why it's the overriding, like, you will still listen to my cues, right? When I'm asking for this, even though there's absolute chaos in your body.
And so that's what I want to dissect. That's what I want to dissect. Yeah. So I'm not exactly even sure the exact way to go about this, because I would say how about I describe what I would call rein back?
Okay, go for it.
And then we'll go from there, because I think what you and I are talking about on the negative don't do it is backing up. Like, and I differentiate
I'm also thinking about the steps back, the 5 steps back that you have to do. There is a price for those.
Okay. Yes. Okay. I want to describe. I'm going to describe rein back as I refer to it when I'm coaching my students. Okay. I would say that the proper rein back has 6 elements to it.
Okay.
I would say the haunches sit, which we can dissect and be like, flexion in the LS, the SI, the coiling of the hind legs. I would say the haunches sit. The withers lift. The top line. Let me just get through it. I think I know where you're going, and I give it in a simplified way, and then we'll dig it. Okay? So the haunches sit, the withers lift, the top line extends.
Okay.
The feet diagonalize. They take several consecutive, consistent steps, and they do it in self-carriage. So there's supreme lightness to the aids.
Okay.
For the rider's aids, I'm not going to dig all the way deep into them.
So that's all you.
But the one thing that I want to get into, the reason why I totally know what you're talking about with putting the horse under distress and how it affects respiration. If the top line is extending, I think it's important to keep in mind, because to me, the top line is supposed to extend. That opens the thoracic, it gives us the availability to the thoracic.
That's not where you're breathing from.
Well, okay, fair enough. Yes, okay, you're right, 100%. But what happens in the rider's hands is that they have to give forward to rein back.
Yes, okay.
Not pull back. Okay. Like, to me, pulling back is absolutely illegal. I would say that your reins at any point are allowed to go forward, upward, open away from the shoulder, toward the withers. Never backwards and never downwards. Okay. If you're doing both of those things, I'll kick you out of the arena, basically.
How many people do you think truly understand that the idea is to go forward for the horse to step under itself?
I think that's why conversations like this are so important, because we're spreading the awareness of what's actually supposed to take place.
Yes.
Right. Absolutely.
And I think that's where, like I said at the beginning, we can look at the anatomy and like dissect that and look at what's happening so that you have an idea. But for me, there is the essence that almost everything, and I know I'm a heretic. I don't mean to be. It's just because I look at things the way that they're put together. I think in pictures. I don't think in words. I think anybody who's ever read any of my stuff knows I can't spell. I have no punctuation, and like, no, words are not my thing, right? I think in pictures, and so when I look at surfaces and muscles, origin, attachment, insertion, fascia, how things are put together and which way the wheels are turning in the cogs, I know that every step back is taking time off the body because it's not
Okay.
designed to do that. Okay. Because if you think about it, you know, in terms of horses, when you see them, and I've seen some of the comments were like, oh, my horse loves to run backwards. I go, well, then I guess your horse is in a lot of distress, right? Because horses do
Right.
backwards for two reasons: to get away or evade, or to turn around and kick. Those are not places of physical and emotional balance, right?
Yes. Would we argue that the horse is doing it in play with each other? Would we argue that that's distress or interest?
So when they're doing it in play, the question is, because we don't know, where does the play, because it's like
Mm-hmm.
kids, right? I have two boys. At some
Mm-hmm.
point, the play goes from play to like serious, and then the wheels fall off the bus.
Mm-hmm. And the idea of play is often mock fighting,
Right.
right?
So
Yeah.
I don't know. And again, I'm not saying that it's only that. And like I said to you, I understand that when the establishment that you're trying to compete through requires that,
Well, and
that
they
it's
took the
something.
biggest part of it out. Like they took out, there was at one point they referred to it, I believe, if I remember correctly, the shackle, where they would rein
Yeah, we
back
need to
and
go
step
back and
forward,
forth. Yes.
and they took it out because it was so difficult. They now require you to rein back. I believe it's 4 to 6 steps, and I think that if the horse is at that level, and it's
It
what,
should be
third,
able to do it.
it's at third level or something, and then they don't touch it after that. If the horse is at that level, they should be able, to me, they should be able to confidently and fluidly rein back the whole length of the center line without any distress and with proper breathing, without challenge. Because if they can, then they're
Mm-hmm.
activating those stabilizer muscles that they need to carry us forward in balance.
Mm-hmm. Okay. It's okay.
I know, and that's what I think is so great about the ability to have this conversation, right?
So, where do you want to go from here? How do you want to
Okay.
unpack the anatomy?
Okay, so let's talk about, well, your original post had two pieces to it, where
Okay.
there was the talk about shoving the horses back onto their back ends.
Which we already kind of unpacked a little, but okay, go for it.
Yep. And then there was a part of that was, and we didn't talk about this, I didn't ask you about this, there was a part of the disengaging.
Mm-hmm.
Was that the same thing with a different word, or are you talking about that whole, foundation horsemanship, disengage the hindquarters business?
So the thing is, when we put the horse in reverse at any point, we are disengaging because the way that all the structures need to work together to move forward. Okay.
Okay.
And so when we ask, I'll give you, I think the simplest visual that I always have is I tell people to look at what the iliums are doing. So the wings of the pelvis, right? So when the horse is moving forward, they're kind of doing that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which is what the joint is designed to do, right? And so we have that nodding of the sacrum, and the lumbosacral joint will open if all is good and the horse is able, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that will create that spinal engine motion that will create that follow through motion. Now,
Mm-hmm.
when we ask the horse to move back, we're jackknifing those iliums. We're putting an awful lot of tension on that SI joint. And what that does is the body's going to try and protect itself, and it's going to activate a ligamental muscular reflex that's going to inhibit muscles.
Okay, now break that down, and why?
Because the ligaments are designed to protect the joint.
Why to the whole part? Why do we, what did you say? We jackknife it?
Yes, because you're asking for the leg to go, you're asking for the leg to go back. So the ilium has to work in reverse.
Okay.
Right? And when the ilium works in reverse, that sacrum gets locked. And what we have essentially is that whole lumbar spine is like a 6-car pileup.
Yes.
Because remember, the horse is supposed to go forward laterally or support itself up when it's rearing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Going backwards is an emergency exit. It's not designed to be utilized a lot. And so the thing here is incremental damage, right? It's every time we overstretch those ligaments, every time we do that. And then the reality is for most horses that their pelvis is rotated onto their spine, right? And we
Mm-hmm.
see it where the pelvis only goes in one direction, only one ilium's
Mm-hmm.
doing the work, right?
Sure. Whether by natural asymmetry or by compensation or whatever.
Doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter, right? And so when we have that, then we only have one SI working and one side of the lumbar that's really doing the heavy lifting, and we have femurs that are now locked, because when you take that ilium back, you're basically locking the range of motion of the femur in the acetabulum, right? And so now they have less range of motion. So everything is locked, right? So the horse can't sit on his haunches, but guess what's doing all the work? Your stifles and your hocks. And how many of those need to be injected all the time, right? And so now they're doing all the work. The problem is we assume that they're both like supporting the horse, but we have,
Because
different
of the natural
orientations.
asymmetry. And
One patella is pointing in, one patella is pointing out, and we see it even in the Olympics. If you look, and they're all going to go and look, I know. If you look at 90% of the horses, when they do those 5 steps back, the left foot is stepping out and wide, and the right foot collapses in. Okay? That's because we have 2 totally different limbs and different orientations doing different things. Can the horse do it? Yes. Is there a price for it over a period of time? Absolutely. And then if we have a horse that's not strong enough, that's not athletic enough to even do that, then now we have more wear and tear and more compensation. So I think, people like to get upset at what I say. That's not my intention. I only care about my client, and my client is the horse. Even though Shelley's trying to educate me that my client is also the human.
the horse doesn't write the check, right? That's
my client is the horse, and I'm really trying to help set people and horses up for success, which is, I think, what you're doing as well, right? So when people come to you and you give a lesson and you have a horse that has no proprioceptive awareness of its hind end, right? And it has no idea where its limbs are, and it's got a weak back, and it's contracted and bent like a banana, because the thing is, you're supposed to start a rein back from square, right?
ideally, yeah. Right.
Okay.
As they're calling in tests and things like that. Yeah, sure.
But you can stand square on your feet and still be shaped like a banana up top.
Exactly.
So I think, I'm not trying to tell people how to do their job. I have, like I said, I base my understanding on my collecting of the things that I observe, what I see every day, and what I know about biomechanics, embryology, and kind of the physiology of the body. And so for me, like, I understand why people do it. You need to have a reverse button. I'm not saying you don't, right? Horses need to reverse out of a trailer. They need to do all sorts of things. I'm just saying that every time we use it, it's money coming out of the bank.
Okay, I can see that. And that's something I talk about with students all the time. It's you're either making deposits or you're taking withdrawals, right?
Okay, and so lastly, I just want to point out with respiration, and it's something that's kind of interesting for me. I did the little video about like the TMJ and the hips, and I thought that was common knowledge, and it would just kind of like, oh, she put out a reel, right? Well, apparently not. So yet another thing that is not considered often is the sacrum needs to move with a diaphragm. And so when we've locked this sacrum up, because we've put the horse in the reverse motion, now it's using its front end to respirate because nothing is moving back and forth. So now it's going to be harder for the horse to be light on the front, which is why it is the litmus test for compliance to ridden aids. Okay.
Okay.
Next.
So what I think we see a lot in, I'm going to call it backing up.
Okay.
because I'm super particular on what I call rein back, right? I see a lot of horses
there
going
absolutely
backwards.
is a difference. Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of horses that go backwards, but that's not rein back, right? In horses that are backing up. So first we said, riders, we often see them pulling back, right? And so when we see that, we see horses that are dropping in the back, right? We see horses that are bracing up in the neck, which we know then the hips are pointed out behind them, making everything more difficult. We see the front legs, or all four legs, dragging lines in the ground, right? Rather than actual articulation of the
Lifting.
joints,
Yeah.
striding backwards. Absolutely. And I think all of those things absolutely are, I mean, we couldn't say that they're anything but damaging for the body, right? And also for the mind, right? Because they're challenging. Now we're putting a prey animal in a very challenged position and we're rushing it. The easiest way to bring out emotional instability in a prey animal is to rush them, right? That's not to say we can't hurry at times, but that's different than rushing, right? They can hurry without rushing just like we could once understanding comes in play. We see riders correcting a horse or punishing a horse with backing up. Okay. That's something, as far as I'm concerned, there's never a place for that.
I didn't think you did, but yes.
Right.
And I think, I will take that it wasn't fair to lump it maybe all in one basket. I will take that. Mea culpa.
Well, you know what? It's giving us the opportunity to have this conversation because I know that there's at least one listener out there who would think that it's an appropriate, in air quotes, punishment for a horse to back them up. I grew up doing that because it was what I was taught. So I know there's at least one person on the planet left that probably still does that and thinks that's okay, right? But what that will always do is jack the body up and jack the brain up, right? When we used to affectionately refer to it as members of the International Rope Wigglers Society, shaking ropes at your horse from the ground, and they appear more to be llamas than horses, right? With their heads up in the air and they're all jacked up, and you could drag the arena with their belly button because they're so inverted, right? That's no good for the horse's body. Does that mean that sometimes we might have to get noisy with our aids to keep from getting run over?
Absolutely.
And is it going to destroy everything if the horse inverts in that moment? No, because you're going to live to fix whatever potential mild momentary distress you caused, right?
Look,
so there's definitely a line between...
No, because in nature there's plenty of distress. There is a reverse button for it is the emergency get out. I'm not contemplating that.
Right.
We have to remember one big difference. One massive difference to tensegrity and to the horse. There is a difference between doing the emergency get out exercise unloaded without a rider and doing it with a rider and having no control of your head and having to carry that extra weight on those stifles and hocks in reverse.
Absolutely. And so that's when we think about the backing up, and we see it a lot of times. Horses, like I'm going to think of reiners. A lot of those horses are taught to really hustle, like haul ass backwards, right? I find myself in most of the English disciplines that rein back is avoided because someone at one point said to do that is bad for my horse. And I watch a lot of the somebodies who say that, and I think, well, damn, you leading your horse is bad for your horse. So of course riding backwards is going to be bad for him. Like, and I'm exaggerating on this, maybe a little bit, but it's the way that they apply it. Of course, it's not good for their horse's body. If the way that they do it is pulling on the reins, is, dragging their legs backwards and squeezing the toothpaste out of them and doing all those things, that in itself, before they even step backwards, the preparation for that is no good for their horse, let alone the movement itself, right? Where I find, and this is where I want to pick your brain about this a little bit, where I find the rein back to be really effective. We talk about half halts.
Okay.
A half halt, essentially distilled down, a half halt is a rebalancing. Okay.
Okay.
The horse in forward movement, primarily, unless his movement has been, as Charles de Cunfee refers to it as, cultured, unless the horse's
Mm-hmm.
movement has been cultured, he's relying on kinetic energy. And it's basically kind of like us falling down a set of steps, right? He's moving forward just because he's moving forward, and so he's rolling
Yes.
forward, and
Oh,
he's on the forehand.
yes. Falling and recycling into the energy that we catch ourselves falling and we recycle it. We're
You
falling
bet.
forward. That's what we're doing.
You bet. Absolutely.
Yay!
So,
Yippee!
see, I knew we'd be on the same page with that. So, the reason that I'll say obsessively use Rainback. And what I mean by that is in an average session, I would probably ask for at least the preparation for Rainback a dozen times.
What's the preparation?
And that's the part that I think is key. The preparation to me is the activation of the postural muscles.
Which are?
To bring the horse off of the forehand.
Mm-hmm.
And then allow him to carry himself forward in what Charles refers to as the cultured energy instead of the kinetic energy, instead of falling downward, right?
Okay.
So those stabilizers, as far as I know, that's what I want to be going after, rather than the locomotive muscles, right? Rather than I refer to them as stabilizers and mobilizers, and I'm sure there's lots of different words for them, and I couldn't tell you exactly what their names are. That's for Tami Elkayam to tell us.
No, because the muscles that you pick as stabilizers and as locomotors help me understand what you think is happening in the body. That's why I'm asking. I'm not trying to trip you up.
No, that's totally fine. Yeah.
Because I'm trying to understand, like when you say you're trying to get the horse to stabilize, well, stabilizers are all the things that are close into the body, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that
Yes.
would be your internal groin muscles, your abdominals. You're basically you're asking for the core to activate. I teach my students that would be your multifidus, your diaphragm, your pelvic floor, and your transverse abdominal. They're going to create a tube.
Okay, yes.
That tube allows for the diaphragm to keep air compression. We sit on air, and I think this is what's really hard for people to understand. The muscles, the fascia, the tendons, the ligament, they assist, but we sit on air compression. We sit on a pressurized tank, and if that can't keep its compression, the fascia can't provide its support, the ligaments can't do their job, and only the muscles are trying to hold stuff together while still facilitating locomotion. And so I think this is where, for me, I'm always like, you need to start with breath. Right?
Yes. 100%. 100%. And that's, my students hear that all the time. It's like, yeah, you can breathe. Your breathing is optional. Is your horse breathing? Right? And I pare it down so much to, can you cause your horse to take a deep breath just by touching with your leg? Can you relax the whole body enough that because you asked a question, he felt like he could breathe better? Right.
Okay.
Which I know is not something that is on the vast majority being taught yet, at least, because it's the vast majority that I think is what we're talking about is discipline and do the thing and control. And we still want that, but we want it within acceptance, right? I'm always preaching, I want acceptance before obedience.
Okay.
But I also want obedience in the way.
I want integrity of tube before motion, because the thing is,
there you go.
You have to understand that all land dwellers, right, that are mammals, locomote, except for things that live in the ocean, locomote through tetrapodal motion. So that counter rotation of hips and pelvis, right? So when you walk, because the turn of the waist is what creates spinal torque. And if you're doing it in reverse, you're not getting that. And so you must have good internal pressure in order to sustain the structure while you're asking for dynamic movement.
Okay. Yeah. And so when we would ask for a Rainback, I would say, we always talk about, or we see riders, we see trainers, hear them talking about correcting a crooked Rainback. Most of my students will tell you that I don't try to do that, that the proper Rainback is correct, but that the rein back will tell us where there's a deviation, where there's a
Okay,
weakness,
we
where we
totally
need to
agree
fix
with that.
those things. Okay. Yep.
Yeah, because you will see where the pelvis goes, what the legs are doing. You know, is it stepping back like
Mhm.
it pooped in its pants, or is it collapsing? Is it
Mhm.
able to sustain itself and the rider and actually lift and articulate the legs? So yes,
Mhm.
if you
Yeah.
do, if you ask a horse to back up, the truth is there for you to see.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And it's awareness and understanding of utilizing those stabilizing muscles in reverse, I think, are very closely tied or linked to how it's going to carry us forward. Right.
Absolutely,
And
because that's the question I always ask people. I'm like, if you can't go forward well in three gaits and be like balanced and nice and fluid, how is
mhm.
going back going to help improve that? And I think that that's the question I always ask people. And, you know, they get upset with me because they're like, well, it does. And I'm like, but how? I'm ready to be wrong if
Mhm.
there is a how, right?
Absolutely. And and that takes us into, I think, a little bit, or at least brings my mind into how soon is too soon to ask a horse to rein back. I think if we distill that question, it's how soon is too soon to ask a horse to be aware of where their balance is and where their posture is. And I start that before I put a halter on a foal. Because when we try to lead a horse, we're trying to direct their balance. What I don't want to
You
do
should be
is
driving them, not leading them, but okay.
driving, leading, floating with, like, what I think we're on the same page with it. We're just talking about it in different words. But what I don't want to be doing is dragging a horse, right? Or being drugged by a horse. Either way, like, I don't want to be the sled and I don't want them to be a sled either. But I don't want to be perpetuating a loss of balance or a lack of balance, right? And I want to feel, so let's say I'm putting a halter on a horse for the first time. I want to feel, if I make a request from your chest or from a rope around your neck, can you feel a rock back? That's all I need. That's a start of a rein back, right? And I
Okay.
tell students all the time, if anything's going right, halt, rock back or rein back, and reset. So it's rock
Okay.
back if necessary, rein back if possible, reset the question, right?
So horses are actually designed to sit in a deep squat. So there's a lot in the
Mhm.
Western world that's actually kind of wonderful. One of the ways that I tell my clients to really improve their horses' kind of hind end balance, because we have to keep in mind something that is obviously ignored, and I don't know why, which is called central pattern generators. So my kid, one of them walks just like my husband. It's a totally different human being, different experience of life, same gait. Okay. And this is a genetic component that comes in. And so there's always that genetic element that we need to take into account when we start to work with a horse and how their body is put together and what are their actual capabilities in terms of becoming an athlete, right?
Okay.
But
Mhm.
I think the thing is that we need to keep that in mind, that like some things the horses are designed to do. They're
Mhm.
designed to sit in a deep squat.
Mhm.
Good for them. They're designed to move off laterally really well,
Mhm.
right? And if you get the horse to sit in a squat and move off laterally, right,
Mhm.
in both directions, the goal is not, and this is where I think people a lot of times struggle with what I try and do. The goal is not symmetry, the goal is ambidexterity,
Yeah.
longevity,
Mhm.
balance,
Mhm.
athleticism. It all comes from ambidexterity,
Mhm.
right? And so, yes, a deep squat is good. Moving off laterally is good. The horse can go up. We know that. It's easy for them. They're set up to do it. The
Mhm.
problem with going back is all these motions, right, are stable. Going back is not. And so the horse needs to be set up to be strong enough to be able to do that, to be coordinated enough to be able to do that, to have enough body awareness so it's not, goose stepping.
Scrambling around. Mhm.
And there needs to, and I think where I struggle with it a lot is the way that the horse is forced onto it. Because if you look at like the pain ethogram, the ridden face pain ethogram, if you look
Mhm.
at the helicopter tails, the flat ears, the droopy eyes, the open mouth, the lollygagging tongue, all that stuff,
Mhm.
you know, you kind of go, well, you're asking to dance ballet, but you're bringing a sledgehammer to a body
Exactly.
that can't do it. You know,
Right.
no. And this is the thing that I think is really a hard reality. I learned this really early on when I went to boarding school. It was an all girls boarding school, and at 16 this girl showed up. She'd been to the London Royal Ballet. She was destined to be a prima ballerina, super talented, absolutely amazing dancer. Her ankles couldn't keep up. She was done,
There you go.
toast,
Hmm.
right? And so there is an element of genetics, there is an element of just sheer luck. Like, I've
Hmm.
seen horses finish Tevis where you're like, I don't, and they're like, hey, right? They've gone 100 miles with bad feet, with an unbalanced rider in a not very great saddle, and they're like, I'm good.
Right. Right. They have this, somehow they have this account that keeps filling itself back up in spite.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Right. Right. And that's where I think this idea of really just understanding what we're asking the horse to do, understanding the toll, the effect that it's taking on the body, because, you know, is I'm gonna quote the heck out of Charles de Cunfee here in several different pieces, but, you know, it's that idea that we're sitting on the weakest part, talking to the most sensitive part, as far as the bit in the mouth, right? The horse is not designed to be ridden. Every moment that we're on a horse should be an apology in motion that develops the horse to better carry us, right?
Mm-hmm.
To build the strength and the ambidexterity. Absolutely. He talks about riding being in 3 specific phases for the horse. And I think it's that way with schooling on the ground as well. The first phase being the restorative phase, where under the weight of the rider, you bring relaxation, balance, purity of the gaits. That
Mm-hmm.
second phase is what we're talking about right now, is that therapeutic phase. That's where straightening, equally loading the limbs, developing the ambidexterity, that's all part of that therapeutic phase. And then he goes into the amplification phase, where we increase suspension, we increase agility, reach, we get that, as he calls it, superior self-carriage, right? That's a whole other level, right?
Right.
And that can be a little bit like what we're talking about with, not that level itself, but when we think about higher level riding, it sounds a lot like what you're talking about with the prima ballerina whose ankles couldn't hold up. There's a lot of horses that, you know, when we think about, oh, my horse in the backyard, I want to do Grand Prix dressage with him. Well, I don't want to sound like I'm snickering about that, because I'm not, and maybe that horse can, right? But statistically, in the US, when we're talking about dressage, statistically 80%, at least the last statistic I read, 80% of the horses were participating or competing at first level and below. Of the remaining 20%, 80% were at second level. Why? Because there's athletic benchmarks that
Yep.
many horses under the weight of a rider can't achieve. And there's a sophistication that many riders can't achieve beyond that, for their own asymmetries, their own abilities in their body. Does it mean that we can't ride things that are upper level? No, not at all. It just means that, you know, on the competitive side, to really develop those well. And then we also see the other side of that, where we've got what looks more to me like a bunch of orangutans running around with razor blades. We've got horses being manipulated with all this ugly crap, and that's why we've got pictures of blue tongues and all this other shit, is all it is, forcing horses to do these things that absolutely breaks them down, because we have the ability to make it happen, right? But at huge withdrawals from that bank account, right? So again, to quote Charles, this is where he would say that, or I've heard him say, I shouldn't say this is where, I don't want to put that on him, but I've heard him say many times that the rider without a theoretical knowledge is an unteachable rider.
I
And that
would
sounds like a little bit of a
agree to
harsh
an
statement.
extent. Yes, I would
Yeah,
agree to
yeah.
an extent. I think, you know what? There's a couple of things that always stand out to me. So when we get, I have zero patience for being in this. I'm like the horses. I go into school and I'm like, I can't do this. Like,
Okay. Yeah.
just zero. I don't have the attention span, and so I have a lot of respect for people that have amazing equitation and knowledge and like know all the ins and out. And I sit next to Camilla and I go, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. She goes, well, she's been counting beats and she can ring them off like that and she can see it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
right? So
Yep.
it's not my thing, but I feel for the horses because I think a big part of horses struggling to do things in the school ring is because they never get an out. So I'm a big believer in a lot of what like Steinbrecht did, where we go and we take the 4-year-old and we ride it in the field until something is
Absolutely.
offered and we
Absolutely.
harness it. Right?
Absolutely. The old campaign school, right?
Yes.
Like when I was growing up showing horses, to campaign a horse meant that you were showing him. But the campaign school that is referred to in, I believe it's French, and I don't speak French, but is a word that translates essentially to riding out. It's not getting the horse ready to show. It's riding him out in the fields, letting Mother Nature teach proprioception
Right,
under
because
the
then you
weight of the
get
rider.
things offered, right? So,
Bingo.
most endurance riders that I know will take, Jeremy's the king of it. He will get on a horse. It's kind of broke. He'll just ride it out and the horse will figure
Mhm.
it out along the way, right? And
Absolutely.
there is a curiosity for the horse in that of like, oh, what are we doing? Where are we going?
Absolutely.
Which makes
Absolutely.
learning, because horses, whether, even though their brain isn't that large, they're still going to
Mhm.
learn like we are. So the more sensory the experience is in a
Mhm.
positive way, the better we
Exactly.
learn, right? And so natural
Exactly.
curiosity is always going to make you feel better. And horses learn through movement by looky-looing. Where are we going? What are we
Right.
seeing?
And those
Right?
novel experiences are better for building in the brain and the body.
Right. And then when
Yeah.
you have a horse, this is where, like, I never understood what people meant when they say that the rider becomes one with the horse, um, until my mare showed me, because, we all get the horses we need.
Mhm.
I used to be riding out in the tree and be going around. When I get to the tree, I'll turn around. The moment I thought turn around, she would plant her foot, spin her ass, and she was tiny, and we'd be going in the other direction. I was like, I didn't do anything. And I
Right.
test drove this. Like, what was I
Mhm.
doing? Did I change my body? Did I change my breath? And I think that's where you get to that point where this, it's like, when you live with somebody for long enough and they just finish your sentences. They know what you mean
Mhm.
when you just look at them. And
Mhm.
I think when you're there, then you can go to those places and the body is physically fit and set up for success. Then you can go to those places where, like, we're going to do something really hard. You're going to hate it. And then it'll be done. Right?
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I think is so essential to, like, when you talk about, oh, I hate the equitation, but that's, when we talk about when we're thinking about the things, right? That's a bit of, and maybe I'll misquote this, the ideomotor response in our brain, the gist of which
Mm-hmm.
says you can't think a thought without your body making a change. Right. And I think that's what we aim to develop with the horse. Right. And we hear riders say all the time, oh, he's just anticipating. Like, I was getting ready to do that and he just went into it. And it's like, and you think that's a bad thing? Like, that's
Yeah.
what we're striving for, you know? Yeah, absolutely. And I think for the majority of our horses to do those things well, they also have to be in that state of balance within themselves.
Yes.
Right. Or they can't act, they can't respond within that moment. And that's where we need to be aware of the timing and have the appropriate feel and things like that. And then the
And
horse
those are
within
hard
the balance.
things to learn. I mean, I
They are.
teach feel and timing, and those are really hard things to learn. And I get, the
Mhm.
students that have been with me a long time, they call me a liar all the time. They go, well, you didn't do what you said. And I go, well, because I had to follow the tissue. That's what the body wanted. But that's
Sure.
not what it said in the book. Right?
Right.
And that's
Right.
and that's the case of, like, experience, timing, and feel. And
hmm
those are just learned through hard sweat and tears.
hmm Absolutely.
Right. And I
Absolutely.
think, um, it's it's hard for me because, I mean, Monique, who lets me do a lot of experiments in her barn on her horses, because I take all my ideas out on the porch and I kick them around really good with a baseball bat before I go, yeah, this actually works.
The idea is not the horses. I'm just going to stress that for everybody listening.
Yes. And so, you know, she has a 19-hand horse that was doing upper level dressage at 4, right? Of course, you know, they totally broke him. And I'm like,
Right.
this is where, when I come and I say to you, please stop doing this is where I'm coming from. I'm not trying to, you know, single-handedly change years of tradition. I'm just saying, like, can we be mindful of what we're asking these animals to do? Can we be mindful of their
Right.
physical state? And can we educate ourselves? I won't ask a horse to do that because I don't have your finesse, right? I don't have your timing. I don't have your knowledge. I don't have your finesse. I'll be like, hang on, let me turn the horse around. Which direction you want me to go? Because
Right.
you know.
Yeah. And so, and one of the things that I think we need to consider also whenever we're talking about doing these things with the horses, we said the horse needs to be in balance, right?
Yes.
My brain just took me into 3 different places here at this point, but
Okay,
when
write
we
them
think
down
about,
and we'll go through it one at a time.
right, it's like where in these notes do I have this piece? Oh, I didn't write that down. When we think about balance under the rider, that's different. I think it's important for riders to understand self-carriage is not just giving the horse all the reins and he carries himself around the arena. That's not self-carriage, right? Self-carriage, as we talk about it from a developmental phase, self-carriage is the horse being able to return to their natural state of balance with the rider on them. When the rider's on them, 2/3 of the weight of the tack and the rider are now on the forehand. So by being on the horse, we naturally amplify this front end that is structurally bigger and heavier, right? And all the weight wants to be carried there. I'm generalizing when I say all the weight, but we put more weight on the end that's already carrying too much weight, right? So for a horse to be in self-carriage, they have to develop enough strength within their own body that in the balance and then in locomotion, they've got the load balanced. If they're balancing that load, they can't change where we are unless they buck us off, right? So 2/3 of the weight of the tack and the rider will always be on the front end. It's
Which is
their
why air compression is so important.
Exactly. That's the first place my mind went when you said that. And that's where it's important that the horse learns how to carry themselves back on that hindquarters, right? One of the things I say to students all the time is you're either working toward collection or you're working toward navicular. There's not really many options in between. There is no riding in neutrality, as Charles would say. You're building them up or you're breaking them down.
Yes, I agree with that.
And oftentimes in the building them up, there's things that will take tax and take toll, right? And that's where the idea, I think, of the body work and restoring and, you know, putting in those other deposits are really important because the act of being on the horse in the first place is going to break him down.
Okay, can I raise a really important question? Remember
Please.
what you were going to say? Write it down if you need to. In relationship to the respiration. So we have to understand that horses, so I do this exercise with my students when they come to the class and I show them all that they're not breathing correctly. Humans do it as well. We're all chest and shoulder breathers, right?
Totally.
We're not actually inflating our diaphragm correctly. And air, like fluid, will take the path of least resistance and fill our abdominal cavity, which is not what it's supposed to do. Our ribs, just like the horses, are supposed to lift and externally rotate. Okay, that's a full breath where we fill the entire lung cavity, right? And most people can't do it, particularly on their right side. And so horses are the same. And because when we ride, we sit on their back and we impact that fascia and we impact the diaphragm and we impact those ribs, they become shoulder and neck breathers like we are, right? And so for me, this is like my students know my golden rule is 3 frames and a diaphragm.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So because 3 frames give you spinal motion on all 3 axes and the diaphragms gives something for the spine to sit on.
So explain the 3 frames. That's something that you just recently posted also, and I thought that was a really
So the
great
3
post.
frames is basically, I learned about axis of motion and people were looking at single joints and I'm like, no. So basically you have a lateral frame, which comes from the aquatic life, our leftover, which is bilateral contraction of our axial skeleton, right? We have 2 rows of muscles up top and ones that go underneath and flank the side, right? And those, if you look at a salmon piece, it's really easy. If you look at a salmon steak, create that push and pull, right? Then we have our dorsal ventral motion, which is our flexion and extension, right? Again, aquatic life, kind of very primitive motion.
Yep.
And then when we came to land, right, we had to create more torque. We got spinal complexities and we got tetrapodal motion, right? And in order for the spine to move correctly in all 3 segments, and in order for force transfer to be correct, and for the limbs to amplify the motion that the spine is generating, you need to have availability of 3 frames of motion. So this, and this.
There you
And
go.
all of that creates a tube. And the tube integrity is held up by the diaphragm, by the air compression, right? Which is why 3 frames and a diaphragm.
There you go. I love that. And classically speaking, again, I'm going to pull in Charles de Cunfee with this, but classically speaking, Charles talks about how the horse has 3 knobs. We're always turning 3 knobs.
Oh, I like
Long
that.
and,
Cool.
it says long and short,
Yes.
left and right, bent and straight.
It's like an Etch-a-Sketch.
Like an Etch-a-Sketch, right? Yeah. Long and short, left and right, bent and straight. And that goes into, that's what I thought of immediately when I saw your post about those 3 planes, right? And everything always needs to start from and come back to relaxation, which is full diaphragmatic breathing and that sort of thing. So there's, when we talk about the establishment and the classical side of things, there's a lot more in there that you're in line with than you would believe, and I think verbiage is what changes, right? And the way that we use our words, I think, is so important. And that's why I try to be.
And I think we've established at the beginning that words aren't my thing.
And that's all right. It reminds me of something that Richard Winters said at a clinic many years ago when I was riding with him at one point. He was talking about the importance of our words and how the same thing can sound the same but mean something different. And he brought in this line. He said, poor Blue was so blue, he blew his nose in my blue handkerchief. And it's like, well, yep, that's all very different meanings of blue, right?
Right.
And that's where I get a bit maybe pedantic about it when I'm with a student and they're like, well, this is this. I'm like, wait. What do you mean by that? What are we talking about here? What are we going with this? And I just want to take a step back when you're talking about those 3 planes and when you talk about that aquatic life and the kind of swimming, that laterality. One of the things that I think is important for a lot of riders to think about is when the horse is in walk.
Walk is one of the most telling gaits there are.
Absolutely. And there's a line that I will give credit to my ex-wife for this line because it's a perfect line. And once a person has heard it, they do not forget it. Are you riding a chicken or are you riding a fish?
I say that. I say it's a chicken horse because it doesn't have a hind end.
There you go. And the idea in the walk is that if that nose is going left and right, the nose is going to go to which hind leg is on the ground, right?
Yep, the pushing leg because it lifts and arcs, yes.
Bingo. And that's the fish. If the horse is walking and bobbing their head like a chicken, their back is tight and they're braced because they're out of balance. And so that's a horse that I say, halt, rock back or rein back, reset, and try to find the balance. And there's other exercises that we can do, but that would be a moment where I'd say he's not in balance, he's falling down, right?
But
if you and I lose our balance,
rotation at that point? What if he's stuck? So the mammalian pattern is for almost all mammals, our left brain hemisphere is more dominant in motor patterns, which means the right side of the body is more active, right? So you're generally going to have everything on the right be short and narrow and everything on the left be long and wide, right? And so what a lot of bodies do, because this is the last part of the motion, is they
Mhm.
get stuck. And if you look down many horses, the pelvis is in one direction, the withers is stuck in another, and the neck is kind of mediating between what won't move. And now we got leg movers because the barrel
Yes.
is locked and the spine is compressed.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. And
So
that's
that's why I'm
where
saying if you ask for a rein back, then you already have the left femur generally in external rotation and in abduction, and the right femur in internal rotation and adduction. So how are
Mhm.
you pedaling back correctly? Because your sacrum's doing the same thing.
Right. And that's where the preparation for it, the question in the
Mm-hmm.
first place, helps us to feel, is the horse actually organized
Okay.
or organizable, right,
Mm-hmm.
to properly do that? Yeah. And sometimes the answer is no, right? And that's when we call
Okay.
a Tammy. We call our body workers. We call our osteopaths. We call our vets. We look deeper, right? We work for that therapeutic phase of training to say if they're not balanced enough to do that, then what, right? What's
Right.
next? And and that's an important thing to think about. And I think in the way that we ask for, to me, the way that we ask for the rein back answers so many questions, because it's, is it rein backable, right? Can they organize their body in order to do that? And oftentimes, if we go there, if we prepare for it and we wait, the horse will find, as we talk about in the Masterson method, right? It's like you point out where the tension is. If they can, oftentimes I find the horse will release that tension, and then they'll be able to organize themselves better for that. Sometimes they can't, but in the way that we ask. So I'm always referring to my aides and telling my students, use your aides with a Masterson mindset. And I say that because I know you understand where that's coming from, right? That idea of your job is not to get the horse to rein back. Your job is not to get the horse to canter or to do a flying lead change. Your job is to ask the question and inspire the horse to do it. It's his job to
Okay.
do it, right? And so this is
Yeah.
where, like, when we talk about the hauling backwards, shoving them backwards, it's like, that's not even a question, right?
Right.
Because it wouldn't be like, on principle, we wouldn't be doing that,
Right.
right? And that's, again, that's my degree of rein back, which is
So I will ask you
just
this. What is, because you said you will come to the end and tell me, and you still haven't told me. You said it's
Uh-oh.
the cure all for everything but pink eye. And so what is it that you think is happening when you do the rein back? Like, why do you think that's the cure all for everything? I have my concept of why I think you
Mhm,
think that way, but I'd be interested to know why you think it's the cure all for everything.
mhm. I think that, and obviously it's tongue in cheek, right? It's not necessarily the cure all for everything, but in the way that we ask the question,
Mm-hmm.
we inspire our horses to rebalance, to relax, to release through the length of their spine so that everything is available to us.
Okay. Because and maybe this is where I've never seen you teach, and I think maybe
Mhm,
that's where the gap is. Because
mhm.
in my mind, in my brain, in my picture brain, which is how I think, right, I see the 6-car pileup, I see the
Mhm.
jackknife
Absolutely.
pelvis, I see all of that, and I'm like, where is the relaxation happening here? Because for me, what happens, and I see it time and time again because I've watched people do it in various reasons for various degrees. What happens is the horse is so like, I'll just do this because the moment I do it, they let me go forward. And then they spring forward because they're like, oh, thank God we're done. Right? Because horses, when they're stressed, they will rush through something.
Mhm,
And
totally.
so people assume that that means that you have impulsion. Or when they compress the
Mm,
spine so much by asking the horse to sit back down, they look at that and they go, look, its back is up. Well, yeah, but its pelvis is jackknifed and its femurs are rotated.
100%.
Right? And
Absolutely.
so I think for me, I haven't seen you, and this is where I'm going to say I can't have an opinion because I haven't seen how you break it down for a horse and ask. And so
Mhm,
I can't have an opinion about something that I haven't seen. And it might be that when you break it down and you ask the horse to take that step back, they're doing it from a place of balance and control and good proprioceptive awareness. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's so. This is where the rein back is the get out of jail that people like, because it requires the horse to have so much proprioceptive awareness and so much coordination that it
Mm-hmm.
often puts online dormant things. And I think this is why you probably like it, is if there are things that are inhibited, dormant, or whatever, because the body has to go in reverse and everything is going, wait a minute, right?
Mm-hmm.
What we're doing is we're bringing awareness to other things. And so
Bingo.
when they go forward again, they're like, oh, wait, I got more stuff
Mm-hmm.
happening. I'm more aware of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
The only problem with that for me is, like I said, is the cumulative damage of using that as a tool to practice proprioception and body awareness.
Mm-hmm. And I totally follow your train of thought with that. And I think that where the difference comes in. So recently, I've become much more fascinated with craniosacral therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I was asking a horse to rein back,
Mm-hmm.
and a therapist, a craniosacral teacher, asked, I didn't know you took the cranio course. So when we're like, let's say I'm on the ground in front of the horse at the nose.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to come into that cranial rhythm, and you might feel halfway down the body where there's, I
Mm-hmm.
refer to it as a kink in the hose. When I'm teaching my students, it's where's the kink in the hose? And I have students all the time that when we start talking about rein back, they'll be at the front of the horse and they'll say, oh, that spot just behind his withers, I can't rein back because that's stuck. Or, oh, that left hip is a little bit sticky, I can't rein back because that's stuck. So
Mm-hmm.
when we ask for the rein back, the aids should be not much more than if you were feeling the cranial rhythm in the
Okay,
horse.
so I'm going to call you up on that one.
Okay.
So if you have a horse that has eyes, and love Mary Sargent with her expression, one eye's buying booze and one eye's buying fags, right? Because they're not parallel. You took you a
Okay.
minute.
Okay.
And if you have those temporals, most horses, that pattern that I was talking about starts at the sphenoid. So you
Mm-hmm.
already have a timing deficit at the TMJ, at the temporal bones. You have a sphenoid that's going, right? So you already
Mm-hmm.
have a timing deficit in that cranial sacral system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I love that you're doing it. I think that's brilliant that you have awareness of it, and that the kink in the hose is an awesome analogy. But I would suggest for you to play with that you look at that and you go, how level are my temporals? Because if they're not
Totally.
level, your
Mm-hmm.
timing is off. Where now you got jackhammers. It's like an engine piston that's not quite right.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's important to pay attention to the kinks, and if you get rid of some of the kinks lower down, maybe the backflow will reset some of that timing.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, if you get the sacrum to move well, it'll help reset that timing. But I think
Yeah.
it's important to be aware, for everybody out there, because we're doing an educational thing, that if you have this already, the timing is already off, because everything in the body is going, wait, am I coming or am I going?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And
Mm-hmm.
what happens
Absolutely.
when that happens, the jaw shifts and the brain's perception of where the midline of the body is shifts over to the left, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that already puts the horse off balance and proprioceptively changes the game.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And where I would only mildly counter that
Mm-hmm.
is that most riders don't have those skills and that awareness.
Fair enough.
Right. And so the real base for my bringing that analogy is that I knew that you would understand like what the listening hands feel
Yes.
like,
And
right?
I love that you're making your students do that. I think it's so
Yeah.
important. I had, when I started over COVID to do Zoom calls because I couldn't go anywhere. I
Yeah.
don't know if do you know Sarah Martin?
The dressage trainer?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So
Well,
I
I've
had a
met
lot of
Sarah
her.
once. but I
Right.
shouldn't say
So
I
I
know her.
had a
I've met
lot
her
of
once.
her students at the time. She was still living in Colorado, and I had a lot of her students do this. And what we actually found that was brilliant is through the homework, the students' hands got better in the ridden because they had better
Yes.
awareness of their
Yes.
horse's body, what it
Yes.
could do, what it couldn't do. Their hands got softer, their aids got better. Like, I
Hmm.
remember we had this distinct conversation about it, that she really felt like they were coming together, and it really changed the relationship with the horse,
Hmm.
even in the ridden work, not just on the ground. So I love that you're that you're asking your students to
Hmm.
engage in that and really pay attention to what their horse can and can't do, and
Hmm.
start from that point rather than from, I'm going to get on and make you do this.
Right, and just monkey around with things. Yeah, and that's where to me, it's so much of an awareness piece. I was working through Pivo, through a virtual lesson just the other day with a client that is she's a veterinary acupuncturist. And when we were asking her horse to release the pole from the nose, I said, use your palpation hands, right? Like put on your palpation hands when we're doing this and feel. Can you feel that from there? Rather than, as so many riders think that I have to do this thing to make this happen. And that's where I try to always bring in that idea that it's not my job to make it happen. It's my job to ask the question. And oftentimes my question is, what does this mean to you in this moment? What I love
Right.
about that is that the horse is incapable of giving a wrong answer to that question, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's my job to inspire them to do the thing. It's their job to actually do it. And that's where I find, again, going back to the rein back or backing up, and we could use it for anything. Like we could be talking about trailer loading right here for all the difference it means to
Right.
me. But it's that idea of, can we bring the horse awareness to the fact that they're not even balanced in that moment, right?
Right.
And that they're using themselves in I'll call it improper way, that
It is.
may
It's
be for
unbalanced.
the movement, for what we're doing, it may be efficient. Like I think we talk a lot of times about the body moving efficiently, but that's different than the body moving optimally, right?
Yes.
And that's
The
where,
body is
if we're
moving efficiently all the time. It has to
absolutely,
survive, right? And
exactly,
I think that's
exactly.
where you're going with that there is this, um, the body will do what it needs to survive. And actually, this mammalian pattern that I see everywhere is actually the body's ease of survival. It
Yes.
is the body's making sure that however it compensates, it doesn't interfere with fundamental functions of survival. And so, yes, I do think that there is a difference between optimal and functional.
Hmm. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. I love it. So look at that. We're on pretty much the
Well,
same page.
I think we kind of knew we weren't far. I mean, and the
Right.
thing is, you know, a lot of times when I write these things, it's because, I've gone out, I've treated horses, I've seen things, and I'm like, oh my God, I wish people would just stop doing this, right? And so I just sit down, I write it,
Totally.
and I put it out, right? And
Hmm.
I think it for me was really interesting, like I said, what I wrote, what I intended to convey, and what people took away from it. It's always a little bit like Chinese whispers.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And it was obvious that you were writing that from a state of, I'm going to say, a state of passion, right? Like you were really
Yes.
feeling what you were writing, and it's easy for people to misinterpret those things. And I think that, again, that's why the ability to have these conversations is so important, because
Right.
one of the things that I saw happening in plenty of comments on that post and comments on shares on that post and things like that is people were really getting bent out of shape.
I don't know
Because,
why.
well, because it was what came from you as an emotionally charged post, and your passion
Mhm.
about writing it struck an emotionally charged chord in them, and they
Yes.
became defensive, right? Or
Right.
they became supportive, and that happened too, right? Like there was
Right.
there was definitely supportive posts
Well,
and
we all
defensive
do
posts.
it. It's
We
human
do.
nature to respond
Yeah,
emotionally before we respond intellectually.
absolutely.
But for me, it's always interesting that I wrote in the post like, "Hey, I'm not looking to upset anybody. I totally understand if people disagree with me. you
Right.
know, but
Which is why I sent
guess,
a reply saying I disagree with this.
and
Because I knew I
what did
could. I
I
knew we
do?
had that relationship that I could do that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's just, I think it's really funny because one of my students said to me, she goes, I don't know why everybody's so pissed with you when you're just trying to save them vet bills.
Right? Right? Absolutely.
So, I really, whenever I write these things, it really is from a point of like, hey, let's raise some awareness. And unfortunately,
Mhm.
as you've said, I'm not a very tactful person, and Blunt's my middle name, and so
It's the time in England, I think. It's the you know a little bit of
maybe
that English bluntness.
I don't know, but it's really
I
Monique
think it's
tells me
great.
all
Like
the
I think
time.
it's one of those things that some people don't know how to take that.
Well, this is something, it's really interesting because there's things that I consistently look at, and I am really like, I try and do better because, I teach people, but people confuse directness with rudeness,
Yes.
which is always fascinating to me. And I'm like, oh, I gotta be nicer, but it's so many words, right? And then there is, then there is, you know,
There's so many words. I love it, Tammy. I love it. So I try, and most of my students will tell you that I try very hard to pick the right words. And what I say to one student can often be very different than what I say to another. So I have one student where I might say, that was shit. Let's do it again, but not so poorly this time. But only because I know I can say it to that student. To
right,
someone else, it would be, here's why that wasn't working. Here's what we can. And it's not that anything is sugarcoated. It's directed in the way that I know that
right,
that person will receive it the best in that, or I think that that person will receive it the best in that
right.
moment. That's the challenge with social media, isn't it?
But you know what? There are challenges, but people do a lot of this confusing of words. One of the things, and this pertains to our topic of what we're talking about, one of the things that I find fascinating is people confuse stability with balance and mobility with imbalance. They do it
Mm-hmm.
all the time. And for me, when people actually feel a spine that can undulate and can move, they freak out because they feel the horse is unstable, right? They don't
Mm-hmm.
understand that that's the throughness. The spine
Mm-hmm.
going, what do you want me to do? Right? That's
Mm-hmm.
the
Absolutely.
power, right? And so
Availability. Yeah.
people like to have stability, which essentially means stiffness. The body is created tethering, right? And
Right.
so there are a lot of things where I'm like, somebody once said to me, oh, you're an old soul. And I'm like, I am. And she's like, yeah, you've been here before. I go, yeah, because I'm not very bright. There's things I don't learn. And this is one of the things where this kind of how I see things and how people understand them. And, I have to work really hard to figure some of that stuff out.
It's hard. It's hard. And there's a line, it was Tom Dorrance said it, and I know I'm going to botch it because I haven't heard the line enough times to etch it into memory, but the gist of it was, I know you think you understood what you thought I said, but I'm not quite
Mhm.
sure you heard what I meant.
It's true. It does feel like that. And a
Yeah.
lot of times when I write a post, I wind up thinking that. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
clearly I did not convey what was in here into what was in here into what was
Mhm.
assimilated by the person at the other end of the text.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what happens from there is really what's important. How do we respond when we feel, and now we're going from talking about horses to now we're going to be teaching people manners. We're going to be slapping fingers here, you know. Um, but I think and that's what I think is so great about the ability to have this conversation. And we go back to it 100 times here, but it's when there's a thing that is said that is not understood, what do we do with it? It's not,
Right,
it doesn't matter what you posted. What matters is what I do with it when I read it,
right,
right? If I read something from you that I say, oh, that's rude, and I respond by saying, oh, Tammy, you're a this or you're a that, not that anybody did, right? But it's, if I come back at it and retaliate with rudeness, well, now we've both shown up, potentially, in my mind, we've both shown up with boxing gloves on, right?
right.
But there's this idea. It's like when your horse is really spooky and anxious. Are you going to hold short on the lead rope, or are you going to let him drift around and let him deal with it? It's like, don't pick up the rope, right? So
Well,
when you
and
read
I think
something that you don't agree with, just don't pick up the damn rope.
it's not even that. So I've had a lot of people say to me, "Oh, this is wrong, that's wrong," and whenever they say that, the first thing I go, "Shit, did I get it wrong?" And I will actually
Yeah,
go and double check myself because I
sure.
don't assume I know everything, and
Right.
learning isn't my forte, and so I have to go and check. And when people say to me, "This is wrong," or "Have you considered this?" The first thing that I do is I might be like, "Well, I don't like what you're saying," but then I'm like, shit, now I got to go check what it means. Right.
Hmm.
And I think
Absolutely.
that's where I sometimes struggle, where I really come from a place of trying to help horses, right or wrong as I may be, or
Hmm.
uneducated as I may be. My hope is to help people do better by their horses. And so, that's the only consideration. I don't have any other purpose beyond that, which is why I
Right.
share so much of what I do. I think I put out a lot of useful stuff
Yes.
um, because I'm looking to help horses. I'm not, and so if I say something that's triggering, like it was for you, and we've had a conversation, and we're not that far apart. Um, but am I going to tell you tomorrow, like, I don't think you should do any more rainback? No, because that's your decision to make. I can tell
Right.
you what I think is the price on tendons,
Hmm.
ligaments, muscles, how it all works, how the fascia can get inflamed and spread throughout the back and create all kinds of issues. But I can't tell you, like, don't do it anymore. I can
Right.
just say to you, this is how I see it, and this has been my experience. It doesn't
Hmm.
make it right or wrong. It's just my
Right.
experience, right?
Hmm.
And then you can go and take away from that and go, well, that's interesting. I might think about that. Or, you know
Exactly.
what? I don't think it's relevant, so I'm not going to pay any attention to that,
Hmm. Right.
which is fair
Absolutely.
enough.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think one of the things that was interesting, and it wasn't meant to be offensive, and neither of us took it offensively, or I assume. I see. That's always my assumption, is that whatever people say about me is none of my business. Right. It's so there was a comment, something about, I vote for Tammy.
Oh,
Right.
did you see how I answered?
And you did. And what I think is great is that you and I are both voting for the horse.
Yes.
Right. So if you
Well, we're
win, guess
having this
what? So do
conversation.
I. Right. Yeah, I think that's great. And this is where, we get into a lot of this discussion about what's right and what's wrong. Right. And there's lots of different theories, and there's lots of different techniques, and there's lots of different schools of thought.
It
I
depends on
would,
the horse.
it depends on the horse. And so I would say that there is only one correct way of riding or working with a horse, and that's working for the good of the horse.
I would agree with that. I would totally agree with that. And the
Yeah.
thing is, I've had people come up to me and go, "Oh, I backed a horse up and it really works." And I'm like, "Okay, well, maybe it does for that horse. I don't know. I don't claim
Mhm.
to have there is never 100%. You live long enough, you see enough. Nothing is
Mhm.
guaranteed other than death, and it's never
Absolutely.
100%, right? So there's
And
always
everything
outliers.
works sometimes.
Yes. And
Right.
I think a lot of it is also luck. So I've had some major success stories where I drive back in the car and I'm like, well, that was lucky, right? Because I know
Yeah.
my limitations. I'm not Superman. Like,
Yeah.
I'm aware that, like, did I help? Probably, but most of it was done by nature and sheer luck. So,
You followed intuition and touched the right button, and the right thing was ready to leave the body, right?
there
Or
you
ready
go.
to realign in the body,
Right, which is nothing to do with me. It's just dumb luck.
right? You were the conduit for that change to happen.
Right.
And that's I think, as riders or handlers of horses, it's our job to be the conduit for their brilliance, the conduit for their development. Right. We're
Right.
not making the thing do the thing. It's like
No.
when riders are talking about, oh, my horse is falling to the inside. Well, what is your pushing with your leg going to do? If you're sitting on top of a falling object, that's like an ant on a brick dropped out a window hoping he's going to change the trajectory.
Okay,
Like,
I think
no, sorry.
everybody needs to go to physics school just for little. Just for little. Now I'm going to be in trouble again.
But again, this goes back to just really understanding what's taking place, right? And
Right.
understanding what's possible, what we can influence, and some of it. So again, I'll bring in the rein back idea. If I'm on the ground and I want
Mm-hmm.
a horse to rein back, we talk about the vertebral pileup. So I love the way that you said it's the 6-car pile. Like I always refer to it, it's the vertebral pileup in the highway of the spine, right?
Yep.
If I'm on the ground holding on, whether I'm holding on to the rings of the bit or I'm holding on to the cabochon nose or the halter, and the horse is moving all over the place and he's doing all these things, what am I going to do? Nothing. I've asked a question. The horse has given me a response of here's the moving I think I need to do. I'm going to stay there. And I tell my
Right.
students all the time, it's like being, you see the classical pillars in the riding schools, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do the pillars not do? They don't
Move.
push and they don't pull, right? They're a point of reference. And when we ride or when we work with a horse on the ground as a point of, when we are the point of reference, it brings to the horse an awareness of where they are out of balance and where they
Right.
are oftentimes where they are out of alignment. And sometimes they need to move in alternative ways to whatever the movement is we asked to sort that out.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying if you pick up on your left rein and your horse dives out the right shoulder and takes you out of the arena, that we're not talking about the same thing when that's the case, right? We're talking about when we're asking the horse where they are posturally, you're giving them another system of feedback, right? Like when we talk about our own sense of balance, right? We have our balance, based on the horizon, based on the floor, right? That we're in contact with. We can
Teeth.
give
Your
our
teeth
teeth,
are
the
your
TMJ and all of
bracelets on
yeah,
a shelf provided by your teeth.
exactly. And
In
so if we
relationship to
can
your eyes.
provide yet another through our aids, yet
Mm-hmm.
another point of reference for the horse as to where they are in time and space, that's where the learning happens because you're not shoving a prey animal around. You're not forcing it. You're not pushing
Right.
it. You're giving it the awareness of its own body. So now you are the conduit for them to do whatever the work is or whatever the exercise is that they can then develop because of you rather than in spite of you. And that's what I think is really
That's a
important.
good way of putting it. Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, Tammy, this has been so much fun. Thank you. I do have a couple
Thank you for
in
having
all of our
me. You have
podcasts.
questions? Go for it. The Spanish
There we go.
Inquisition.
Well, do we have questions? Okay, well, let me see. There's been some folks talking in the chat about the questions, and we started this conversation before we went live with saying Tammy doesn't want to see the comments. She doesn't want to see what people put in because there's too much going on of it, and there's been a lot going on in there. There's about 8,000 comments, not really, but there's a lot going on in there. So if anybody does have a question at this moment, and yeah, if anybody has a question, go ahead and put that in the chat here as we are. And I'm going to pull out, I printed out a couple questions here. And these, of course, these questions that I printed out are going to go back to your original post.
Okay.
Okay.
Go
And
for
I'm
it.
going to take out the parts that at this point aren't suitable. Okay. So one person asked that you mentioned kissing spine in relation to backing up.
Yep. Because of our car pileup and our lack of tetrapodal motion. And then what happens with the car pileup is there's local inflammation of the tendons and ligaments, which infects the fascia, and that spreads like wildfire. And so the spine then becomes stiff. Fascia loses its elastic recoil and its glide and viscous properties. And so over time and repeated application, that's what we get, because we have to remember as well that the lumbar spine is the counterpart for the cervical spine. So if you have a 5-car pileup or a 6-car pileup at the lumbar, it's going to lock up the cervical spine because it needs to balance out what's not happening here.
Yep. So she carries the question deeper, and I think in my mind, part of it you just answered with the stiffness in the back. If this is a link, why do we see so much change in the spines of race horses who have rarely, if ever, been asked to back up? Now, I'm going to say I've seen enough of those horses work to know that backing up is sometimes from the handler's position used as like punishment for forward, shove them backwards. Where my mind went when you were just answering that question is the stiffness in the back for those horses that are taught to lock into the bridle, lean forward, and they run downhill like a wedge.
Well, they hop
But
up and then they go forward and they do two legs instead of, getting a gait. But
Mhm.
you know what? I'm going to be in so much trouble again. Thoroughbreds are not the marker for anything to look at, because if you take a body that's that large and you start it before anything is fused and anything is fixed and anything is strong enough to do it, and you make it run like that, plus there is a genetic disposition. Many thoroughbreds, because we've inbred them like royals, right, have
Mhm.
curved spinous processes. And so
Mhm.
for me, whenever anybody does a study on a thoroughbred, I'm like, it's not fair for horses, because they're just so manipulated and so overworked at such a young age where everything is so fragile, that I feel like making any comment on that and comparing it to a horse that was started at like 4.5 and was taken, through the correct steps is like not really an equal comparison in my
Mhm.
mind.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think there's also a mental component in with that, right? However
Yes.
they're started. Like
Yes.
if you wait to
Yes.
start a horse until they're 8 years old, but you start them with stress and tension, you didn't do that horse any favors.
No, but structurally they're going to be a little bit more sound. I mean, stress is a major it just changes so many things. Like, I've been reading a little bit about this, and I hate chemistry, but it's part of it, about that kind of cellular tension and what happens when we have stress and how that affects the quality of the
Mm,
tissue, how the cells work. It's Stress is the killer for all of us. I know it's necessary,
mhm.
but yeah, it's bad.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. So Karen posted a comment in here, and I'm not sure if it was based on our conversation or based on some previous comments that were
Okay.
made in the discussion, but I'm going to pop this up here because I think it is a great thing to point out here for
Do I need to
everyone
read
to
it?
see. It should be no. So, and it doesn't look like it's going to let all of it show up on the screen. So, what she said was, don't confuse not listening with the time and experiences it takes to integrate new information and movements. Being watched while taking in new information and being asked to execute it is hard. Give them some
Yep.
grace, please. And I love that. I think that's really important to think
No, it's
about. And it's
absolutely
something that I
true.
think for horses and for students, I tell all my students, like,
Yes.
you got permission to suck at this, right? Anything worth doing is worth doing poorly until we learn how to do it well.
See, and I do that after I go, no, don't do that. And so sometimes I'm not very good at I'm not always very good at doing that. And the people, like, it's really funny. The people that have been with me long enough are kind of like, oh, she's yelling again. Right. But the
Yeah.
people that are new, I sometimes forget. And like one of my students has to go, you're being mean, calm down. I'm like, okay. Like
That's
Camilla
funny.
does this, she'll stand behind me and go,
I
I'm
love
not
it.
always very graceful, I will admit.
There you go.
Afterwards, I'll be
I
like,
love it.
look, I'm really sorry. I'm just blah, 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 blah. But when they're doing it to the horse, because I see the horse's expression, I'm like, no.
Right. Right. Yeah. What is it? Eckhart Tolle says the first step to being in the now is finding out afterwards that you weren't. Right? You're on your way to fixing those things, Tammy. It's all good. It's all good. Not everyone is born Buddha, right?
Nope.
That's why it's such a
Definitely
big
didn't
deal.
stand in that line.
I love it. So a question here coming in from Lisa, and I haven't read through it before reading it out, so I'm hoping it is a question. Can we as riders gain access to the diaphragm to help the horse to breathe better? And also the stabilizer muscles, can we gain access to them as a rider, or maybe we need to get access from the ground first?
So this is why the hind limb hammock is so powerful, because it does the tetrapodal motion with the diaphragm, because the diaphragm goes into the psoas that go into that iliac fascia and go down into the femur. And when you
Okay.
ask for that leg to come over in both directions, you're dropping the whole pelvis, you're rotating that lumbar, and you're also pulling on that connection, because in order for the diaphragm to be fully activated, the horse needs to have a stable hock. So if your horse doesn't have stable hocks, it is not breathing correctly, right? And that's the biggest giveaway I can give people. And so if your horse is not breathing correctly, chances are you shouldn't be clambering on and trying upper level dressage until we have none of this wobbly and twisty. I hope that helps. So yes, we can do stuff on the ground. I think we can do, so for me, if you want to get on and do stuff to help the diaphragm, people are going to kill me right now, just canter. Find a hill.
I knew you were going to say that. Based on the conversation we had last time, I knew you were going to say that. Yep.
Just go, because when they start to cough and breathe and snort and do and just find a hill, suck up, put on your big girl pants, find a hill. That's what endurance riders do. They go, oh, that hill's about a mile long, let's go. And just commit to it. Let go, don't look at the ground, and just go. And when the horse drops, thump, and goes really, really fast, then when you get to the top of the hill and it's going, you done it.
Can I give an alternative?
Yes. Go for it.
I'm not saying that won't work. I'm saying if you don't have your, as Tammy said, your big girl panties, if you don't have those to put on, because I don't always, what I would suggest as an exercise, and I do this with my students a lot, is if you're riding on a circle, hold your inside leg on and don't push, but hold it on. And like when we talk about the palpation hands, right? Feel what your horse is doing. And what I like to do is wait with that leg on and circle as necessary until you feel your horse sigh.
Yes, the snort is huge. The cough is huge. Yes. It just means that they're going, oh, well, I need a little more air. I got lungs.
Yes. And oftentimes if it's a past life experience, past training from the horse, they will often hold their breath as self-preservation in response to the rider's leg, or in response even to a rider picking up on a rein. So when that happens, I try to really be aware of it. Is my horse breathing? And so if I touch with a leg, and I'm talking touch because I'm the laziest rider on the planet, I will not squeeze with a leg.
You know, that's the cool thing. The lazier you are, the better the horses are for you.
100%. And the more you can feel. So when you talk about building awareness in those riders' hands and in their seat, it's the awareness, it's the feel, right? It's the being late. Like I joke, that's going to be my next t-shirt, is laziest rider in the world, right? But if you can wait, when I notice a horse starts to hold their breath, and they can hold their breath for an incredibly long time, I'm going to wait. There are some sessions, thankfully not lots of them, but there are some sessions where we do next to nothing but stand there and wait for a horse to take a deep diaphragmatic breath.
That's a lot of pressure, just standing there.
A lot of riders struggle with that. I find it fascinating. I've fallen in love with the process. Okay. Yeah. And so sometimes we move and do something to get it to happen, and and it depends on who that horse is as a person. Sometimes they can't just stand there, right? So I'm following you 100%. Yep, absolutely. But so that's going to be my alternative to the gallop up the hill for a mile.
So the only thing that I'd be interested to know, like when you do that, because the gallop utilizes that psoas moving through the iliac fascia and reconnects, because they lose that a lot, just like humans do, reconnects that hind limb motion to the diaphragm and moves that viscera. Because the thing is, when you canter, you're using that ping pong of diaphragm and pelvic floor, and you're actually forcing the diaphragm to kind of activate and let go because you're moving the internal organs. So that's the only difference between, like, what you're doing is a lot more gentle. I think it's important. It's a nice step to do. But sometimes if you have, especially a high strung horse, that is going to be like, why are we going in circles? What are we doing? You know, bats in the belfry. Doing that tends to, like, just, they get to the top of the hill, they're like, I'm tired now. And I'm like, good, but now you're breathing.
Right. Absolutely. And that's where I think it's important to be able to, the way that I would look at the difference in these two is it's important to have a difference in what's the physical exertion to get the release. I'm not saying physical exhaustion. I don't want anybody listening to hear it that way. It's not physical exhaustion,
no,
physical exertion. But it's, can we get it through the movement, or can we get it, like, the alternative is that softer, slower? I would think of it as more, it's like the psychological release that allows the unlocking. right?
Yes.
And not one is not necessarily better than the other. It's the
No, it's a
situation.
different approach.
It's a different approach. It's situation. Sometimes we don't have that mile hill to canter up, but we have a
Right.
flat arena, right? And so we'll use it. Like, I'm a big fan. We're here in Virginia. I've got hills for days, right? I love doing canter sets up the hills and things like that with our horses
And
to
they
get
love
that
it
moving.
because
And
it helps
absolutely
their
they do.
brain too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so getting out on the trails, getting out of the arena, going in, nobody can train a horse better than Mother Nature can when it comes to balance and proprioception.
True.
Okay. A comment from, this looks like Clara. Does Tammy have a favorite exercise or movement that we could or should do in hand or under saddle? And she ends that with, give us some candy.
Do your hind limb hammock and make sure to iron your thoracolumbar fascia. If you do those two, you're going to be able to activate. You're basically allowing the tube to come to life. You're offering the horse everything that is necessary for the tube to come to life. I think both of those are available like on my website. Some of the videos don't work for some reason. I need to get my tech support to go and check it out. But I know the hind limb hammock, I put it up recently. That is like the cure-all. Like you say, the rainback is the cure-all for everything. The hind limb hammock is the cure-all for everything. Everything.
There we go.
Because it goes all the way up to the sphenoid and it totally changes like that rotation and it sorts out the pelvis and it does the sacrum and it does the whole thing. 3 frames and a diaphragm.
There you go. I love that. That's fantastic. Candace has asked the question, it's just gaited horses, question mark.
Oh, Lord. Okay. Gaited
Uh-oh.
horses. So I've done enough endurance rides where I've stood with Chuck and a gaited horse will come along and I'm like, because normally I do the heavy breathing and he's like, he's been doing veterinary medicine as long as I've been alive and he'll turn around, look at me and go, uh-huh. Right? And so when a gaited horse comes along and I'm like, gaited horses are really hard because you're like, there's 4 feet from 4 different horses doing 4 different things. And so
That's funny.
I think it depends.
And
on,
I know we have at least one gaited horse specialist listening to us live here.
Oh, well, that would be great.
Or we did. I know Carl was in here for a minute. So
it would be nice if, they gave input. As far as I'm concerned, like if they're truly gated, it's genetic. And so
yes.
The body can adapt to it. And I'm assuming the respiration is the same. I think I've only ever treated 2. I don't have a lot of gaited horses. And when I do see them, I kind of go by what Chuck told me, which is as long as everything moves kind of in the same direction in sort of symmetry, we're good. So I'll be the first one to say there are things that I don't know, and I don't know enough about gaited horses to really. I'm assuming that the foundation of tetrapodal motion still applies, even if they're gated, because they're not always gated. When they walk, you can see where they're struggling, right? So when they're in other gaits, you can still see where they're struggling, and the same rules apply. It's just they have that extra gait.
Okay, there we go. I'm going to scroll down here to our other question. I hope that was helpful. And like I said, I know that Carl was listening here for a moment. So if you're
nice.
on here still, and
like I said, I don't know enough about gaited horses to have the nuances.
yeah,
but a horse is a horse.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Oh, and that question did pop up a couple times there. So let's see. Where am I at here? Okay, I'm just scrolling down through our questions here. One comment, and I'm not going to try to say the name, but I'm afraid I'm going to say it wrong. But the comment is, I loved seeing more people watching this live than AGDF. And if I understand AGDF as the acronym, that is the Adequan Global Dressage Festival. So if we had more live watchers than that, we're doing okay.
You're
Uh,
doing okay.
on my phone over here, it popped up that we have 1,000 people watching us.
No,
So
really?
that may be how
Wow,
many
that's
people have just
cool.
skipped through, because for whatever reason, when they changed this platform right now, it's not giving me an actual number. Uh, so anyway, this is great.
Let's hope
No
we were
pressure.
entertaining.
No pressure or anything there, Tammy, but you got 1,000 people watching here. So, Stephanie came in with a question. Backing a few steps at a time has been suggested to me for an EPM horse with wobbly hindquarters. It sounds like other balance and strength issues may need to be addressed first, though. Is this correct?
Okay. So whenever EPM is, a neurological thing, right? And so when we have a wobbly hind, it's because the telephone line is so long. By the time it gets to the end, it's like, right? So the timing takes time.
Mm-hmm.
For me, if you're trying to create proprioceptive awareness, I think backing up requires so much coordination that if anything, it's just too much. Like, I don't think you're getting the finesse, because for me, when I think about proprioceptive awareness, like how many joints are in each leg, right? You don't know which they're aware of and which they're not. Are we talking about left or right? Is the pelvis sat on correctly? Chances are, if the horse has any kind of dysfunctional motor pattern already, that they're not moving at an optimal or at a correct way. And so by backing them up, you're just reinforcing the dysfunction, in my opinion. You're probably going to have stifles that are carrying the load, and hocks that are like doing all this,
Mm-hmm.
that is not going to help the horse. So for me, I like to actually take joints through a range of motion. I do a lot of the horses have a bigger cerebellum than humans. They have way more proprioception, they have way more coordination, and they have way more balance. And so when we start to touch and just bring awareness and then lift the leg and put it back down. So one of the biggest proprioceptive is single leg loading. So lift the leg, hind limb hammock, let the horse load it again, ask for the other leg. The balance and the reloading after a period of total unloading helps that proprioceptive awareness. I think once the horse is stable and balanced, if you want to test drive how well you've done and you ask for a couple of steps back, that's great. But the thing is, we always think that we're going to strengthen things, but like the meniscus isn't getting strengthened, the ligaments and tendons aren't getting strengthened, the lack of synchrony in the muscle firing, because they're out of sequence, isn't getting strengthened. The back is then going to lock and be stiff. So what are we teaching the body? We always have to assume that when we want to teach the body something, what is not happening? What is the body protecting? And where can I come in between that in order to help the body see what it's missing and sort of reconnect with what it's missing?
Mm-hmm. I think that's really important to think about. And one of the things, this is coming up, we had a question pop in about strengthening stifles. And so this leads me to think about, I heard Jack Ballou talk at one point about strengthening stifles or issues with stifles. And she brought out a really great point that sounds like very much what we're talking about right now. She came back with a question of, is it pain? Is it instability? Is it lack of strength? Or is it dysfunction? Because those things could all be like, you could have a different answer. My horse is weak in the stifle. Is it because he's painful in the stifles? Is it because the
So they're
stifle
all
is
going to
dysfunctional?
follow from each other. They're all going to follow, because if you don't have, so the way it works is when a horse takes a step, there's force closure of muscles that close the ilium over the sacrum, right? That femur comes in under that ilium as a stable loading pillar, which then the horse lifts up from, right? That's what we're looking for. But if you've got instability, so if you have, most horses, like I said, will have one femur that's restricted in how much extension it can do and one femur that's restricted in how much flexion it can do. And so they have different, one is internally rotated, one is externally rotated. Those patellas are going to sit differently. right? Within
Mm-hmm.
that tension pattern, those hocks are going to be affected because of the reciprocal mechanism by those tension patterns. And so when we do this, maybe we're helping one, but the other one's paying the price for it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so did the meniscus that's not able to move correctly get the memo that we're strengthening muscle? Right? Did the stifles that the talus is now, sorry, the hock that the talus is now a little shifted on that groove, right? Get the memo that we're not 100% level, so we might be squeaking all the way back and down. So it's
Mm-hmm.
just, if we're going to strengthen something, we have to come from a point where everything is stacked and stable and loaded. Otherwise, we can't even begin to start the correct sequence. And so I think, it starts with instability because of compensation, right? And then that leads to wear and tear, which creates more pain, which then to some extent creates sensory inhibition. Because if there's so much pain, the brain
Mm-hmm.
is going to cortically smudge that area. And then once the
Particularly for
brain's
a prey animal like a horse, right?
right,
Because if they
it's going to
appear lame, they're going to be the first ones picked off from the herd by the
right.
predator. So they hide lameness for a living.
Right. And so by the
Yeah.
time that we catch on, it's been going on for a while. So it might already be in the field of chronic pain. Now
Mm-hmm.
you're like, this is why people go, I don't know, I've looked at this. So it's $1 million pony and we still don't know what's wrong with it, because generally there's a lot of chronic pain that happens as well, particularly when we look at the back. And so I think we need to look at all these things. This is what I said. When I say don't do it, it's because I have a litany of like, of things that we need
Mm-hmm.
to consider. And so if we haven't considered those, is it a good idea? And I think that's where, as Jack said, like, is it a good idea? Do we really know what's happening when we're doing
Mm-hmm.
these things?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. That's awesome. I think one of the things I try to think about all the time is that whether we're working with a horse on the ground or under saddle, all of the work that we do with a horse is body work, either to the benefit or to the detriment, right?
Yes,
You're
motion
never
is
not
lotion.
having an influence. Yeah, motion is lotion.
Motion is lotion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so we do have a little bit of an update. Anne posted that when she posted this about 5 minutes ago, there were 81 people watching the AGDF right now. And my phone refresh tells us 1,102 people watching us. So we
Yes.
win. We win. We're way cooler, at least for now. Anyway, so
Just
this
imagine
is
what
this is
would have
really great.
happened if you put your little thing that you sent me this morning out with the honey badger and the Teflon.
Oh, I don't know that I can find that. Oh my goodness, this
Here,
is hilarious.
I have to show it to people because
I
that's
wonder
hilarious.
if you can share your screen from that. So we
No,
were
I'm
joking
just
about
gonna.
going into this as if we were going into like an AFC fight, and we said that Tammy was the honey badger and I was Teflon because things just slide right off me. So I love it. So she just showed you on the screen right there the little
Here.
cartoon that AI put together for us, the honey badger versus the Teflon pan. That's hilarious. Love that you showed that. That's so funny. I'll have to put that in the comment section too when the video is done here. So that's so funny. We've been told now that we are way cooler than AGDF and we are way geekier. I love it. Okay. And Camilla has asked me, Patrick, how far in the education is the horse before you back him or her up as part of the training? I start it with the first interactions with the horse. I'm not saying that I'm backing him up, but I'm asking him to be aware of his balance so that he could if he felt like he was ready. So
Can I just shout out respect because it's like 12 o'clock midnight in Denmark and she's still up.
that's fantastic. She did make a comment up there in the thread that sometimes you're too enthusiastic when you're teaching. So thought you'd like to hear that. I knew you'd get a kick out of that one too. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, I always wrap up our podcasts with some final questions for everyone here. So I want to ask a few of these of you here. And first, thank you so much.
Yes, thank
This
you.
is how change and education happens and spreads in the horse industry, in any industry, is the willingness to have conversations. We started out saying we're talking about this from two different places. Turns out we're coming from very closely aligned principles at the very least. And that's, again, where the horse wins. That's where the horse wins. So I love it. Thank you, Tami, so much for that. So do you have a favorite book, or what book are you currently reading?
Oh, I guess I'll have to go get it. I have my Bible. Hang on, let me go get my Bible.
She just left.
I left. No, I came back.
You just left. There she is. Okay. I was going to say, was it
So,
something I said?
this
Oh, the
book
Bible,
is
Muscles and
like
Meridians, Manipulation of Shape by Philip Beach.
This
Okay.
book was like somebody went, wet fish. And I went, okay. Right? Like it was just, I kind of catalog how I learn before I read the book and after I read the book.
I like it.
That's like my Bible. What am I reading now? I think right now I've gone back to embryology because I watched Jaap van der Waal and I was like,
yeah, you were mentioning that.
Okay, back we go down that rabbit hole.
Interesting. I like it. Very cool. Okay, so along with this, what comes to mind? This is like the before you read the book and the after you read the book. What comes to mind is one of the hardest lessons that you have had to learn so far in the pursuit of this passion?
I don't know shit. No matter what I think I know, something's going to come along and go, rug.
Yeah, right? Right? I believe it was Ray Hunt said to us once, he was one of my primary mentors early on, and he said, about the time I say to never do something, we'll find a reason to do it.
And so I tell my students at the beginning of every class, like, this is what I know now.
Yeah.
But if you come back next year, I might have new shit.
Absolutely. And we would hope so, right? Because it means we're growing, we're learning more.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I love that. I love that. Okay, final one. And I steal this question from the podcaster Tim Ferriss because I think it's so great. If you had a billboard that was big enough that the whole world could see it, what would you put on that billboard?
Well, there's two. Both of them Camilla came up with. So one is what my husband says that I do, is I pet horses for money. And
I have a shirt from a good friend of mine who's a body worker, and it says professional horse petter.
See?
And in fact, I said Grace is listening. Grace is good. Yeah, there you go. That's
and the
perfect.
Other one is tensegrity, because biomechanics is dead. Oh. Biomechanics is about right angles, straight lines, exact angles, and nothing in the body works that way. Tensegrity is a mind flip. And I think I realized that as I started to study it more and look at like force transfer and stuff like that. So for me, like, biomechanics is not applicable to a living body, because a living body is ever changing and organic and can do things that, like, we look at a horse like we look at a building, but a building needs to be anchored into the ground to keep its shape. We living things maintain our shape while manipulating it.
Yeah.
Right? We don't, and so I think for me, when people start to like measure right angles and straight lines, I'm like, everything in the body is a spring. It's all elastic. Mm-hmm. It's all organic. How are we measuring? And I know we need to start somewhere, but for me, like that difference is the biggest thing, where I'm always like, we cannot look at the body that way. And I think this is why I say these things where I'm like, that's wrong. And people are like, oh my God, you don't know anything. And I'm like, okay, but that's how I look at it, right? Like,
right. But wait, there's more.
Right? And so I think, but this is why I said, when you said to me, what is the biggest discovery, that I don't know shit. Because every time I learn something new, I'm like, oh, well, here we go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. That's fantastic. Tami, thank you so much. This has been an absolute pleasure. So much fun. Thank you for joining me for talking about horses. And thank you all for listening. Thank you all for sharing that we were doing this and for bringing so many of your friends to listen. In the future, if I want something to get a lot of traction as a post, I'm going to say that Tami and I disagree on it. because that got us a lot of traction. I mean, we did disagree, but that was kind of a hot button. So that's
It's
the
funny
joke is
because
if I
we've
want.
done 2 of these for your students, and it was like just conversation, which is what we did today. But yeah, maybe we should
Exactly.
do them more.
Yeah,
Thank
there
you
we
so
go.
much for having me. It was fun.
Absolutely. Thank you. And again, thank you all for listening. And those of you who are up late or up early, wherever you are in the world, thank you for listening. And hopefully we will see you again next time. Thanks, gang.
This has been Talking About Horses. Patrick King has been seeking out the wisdom of the masters for several decades now, all over the world. And the guests on this show are considered among the top teachers, trainers, and thought leaders in the industry, focusing on horse welfare, classical principles, and an honoring of the student's learning process. We hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon. Find us on Facebook and Instagram at Patrick King Horsemanship and Dressage, and both websites at pkhorsemanship.com and academyforclassicalhorsemanship.com. Keep riding, and we'll talk to you soon on Talking About Horses.